Everyone can see you're useless, Dad. The words cracked through the room like a shot in a quiet room. Jessica didn't look at the casket. She looked at me, like she'd practiced this. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. The entire chapel, maybe 40 people who'd come to pay their respects to my wife of 53 years, went dead silent. I stood frozen near Margaret's casket, my hands still adjusting my crooked tie, one brown shoe, one black shoe visible beneath my wrinkled pants. Jessica, please. Not here, I whispered. Oh, it's exactly here, she hissed, so everyone understands what I've been dealing with. Don't ask him anything, Jessica continued, her voice still carrying to every corner of the room as she strode toward me in her perfectly coordinated black dress. Ask me. He doesn't understand what's happening anymore. Mrs. Henderson from next door had her mouth open in shock. Tom Walsh from the bank was staring openly. The pastor's wife had stopped arranging flowers, her hands suspended in midair. My face burned, my throat closed up. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even look at the faces I knew were all staring at me now. Someone behind me whispered, "Oh my." Mrs. Chen from the senior center started to step forward like she might intervene, then stopped when Jessica's eyes flashed toward her. "Look at yourself," Jessica snapped at me. "You can't even dress yourself properly for your own wife's funeral. One brown shoe, one black shoe. This is exactly what I'm talking about." Shame hit me hard, because part of it was true. I'd dressed in a fog, grabbing whatever was closest. "Ma'am, please," the funeral director said quietly, appearing at the edge of our group. "I'm his daughter," Jessica cut him off sharply. "He's not making decisions today." She looked around the room. "If anyone needs a signature today, you come to me. He's grieving, he's confused, and he's not signing a single document without me. I wanted to disappear. I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me. Instead, I stood there like a statue, absorbing her words in front of an audience of neighbors, friends, and colleagues who were witnessing my public humiliation. "I'm sorry," I whispered, but my voice was so small it barely carried to Jessica, much less to the room full of people watching this spectacle. "Sorry doesn't help," she snapped. "You couldn't even remember to pick up your suit from the dry cleaner. I had to send Michael because you're so completely lost without Mom telling you what to do every second of every day." "Don't act surprised," Jessica said, turning to address the room directly. "He's always been like this. Mom just covered for him. Now that she's gone, he's completely helpless." "You're pathetic," she said, and that word, pathetic, seemed to hang in the air like smoke. 68 years old and you can't handle basic adult responsibilities. Behind me, I heard quiet murmurs. "Poor thing," someone clearing, their throat uncomfortably. The air felt thick as people shifted, unsure whether to watch or look away. I stood there, surrounded by people who'd known me for years, feeling exactly as small and useless as my daughter was telling them I was. Because if she could say these things to me here now, in front of everyone at my wife's funeral, they must be true. They must all be able to see it too. Jessica thought humiliating me in front of everyone was the worst thing that could happen that day. She had no idea what Margaret had written into the will. In that moment, standing beside my wife's casket while my daughter destroyed what was left of my dignity, I felt something inside me break that I wasn't sure could ever be fixed. And the worst part, I didn't even realize she'd already started taking control. The week after the funeral, Jessica took control of my life with military efficiency. She arrived Monday morning with a notebook and what she called a plan for getting Dad organized. "We need to talk about your situation," she announced, settling at my kitchen table like she was conducting business. "Mom's gone, and things need to change." I sat across from her, still in pajamas at 10 in the morning, feeling like I was being called to the principal's office. First, the house. It's way too big for one person, especially someone who clearly can't maintain it. She gestured around my kitchen, which admittedly had seen better days. Dishes in the sink, newspapers stacked, Margaret's coffee cup still by the window where she'd left it. "I can clean up." "Dad, look at yourself. Look at this place. When's the last time you shaved? Did laundry? You're falling apart, and the house is falling apart with you." I touched my chin. She was right about the shaving. "I've been researching assisted living facilities," she continued, making notes. "There's a place called Sunset Manor about 20 minutes away. Clean, safe, meals provided, activities, perfect for someone in your condition." "My condition?" "Dad, you're 68, you've never lived alone, and you clearly can't take care of yourself. Yesterday I found you trying to make coffee with the can opener." Had I done that? The past week was foggy, a blur of grief and confusion. "The house can be sold," Jessica continued. The market's good. I've talked to a realtor and she thinks we could get 450, maybe 500,000. After paying off the mortgage and covering assisted living costs, there should be a nice nest egg left. Left for what? Jessica looked at me like I'd asked why the sky was blue. For your care, Dad. And eventually, she shrugged. We all have to think about the future. My funeral expenses, my death, her inheritance. I don't want to sell the house. Dad, what you want isn't really the point anymore. You need care. You need supervision. You need someone to make decisions because you clearly can't. She pulled out legal documents. Power of attorney, medical directives, financial authorizations, just temporary until we get you situated. I stared at the papers that would give Jessica control over my money, my property, my medical decisions, my life. This is what Mom would want, Jessica said, and that argument hit harder than all the others. She worried about you constantly. She made me promise to take care of you. Margaret had worried about me. I'd seen it in her eyes during her final months, the way she'd fret about my ability to manage simple tasks. Where do I sign? I asked quietly. As I signed document after document, I felt pieces of myself disappearing with each signature. My independence, my autonomy, my identity as a competent adult. There, Jessica said, collecting the papers. That wasn't so hard, was it? The transition happened with bewildering speed. Within 2 weeks, Jessica had arranged everything. The realtor came, talking about staging and market position, discussing with Jessica how to clear out personal items and neutralize the space. The assisted living coordinator arrived with forms and a brochure showing elderly people playing board games. Thursday, Jessica brought boxes and started packing my life. Dad, you won't need most of this stuff. The room at Sunset Manor is small, and they provide what you'll need. I watched her pack away Margaret's china, our wedding photos, my business awards, 50 years of life going into boxes marked storage, donate, or trash. What about this? I asked, holding my father's war medals. Jessica barely glanced. Focus on practical things, clothes, medications, maybe one small personal item. You're not moving to another house. You're moving to supervised care. By Friday, I stood in a small room at Sunset Manor, surrounded by the few possessions Jessica had deemed necessary. A single bed, small dresser, one chair by the window. On the dresser, a photo of Margaret, my pill organizer, and a large numbered clock. Through my window, I could see the parking lot. Beyond that, a chain-link fence. Beyond that, the world I'd been removed from. See? Jessica said brightly. Clean, safe, and you don't have to worry about anything. The house closes next week, she informed me. $480,000. After expenses, that leaves about $350 for your care fund. Should last until I died. Then whatever remained would be hers. I'll visit once or twice a week, she promised. The staff here is wonderful. That night, lying in my narrow bed in a room that smelled like disinfectant, I wondered if Margaret had known this would happen. The woman next door was crying. Someone was watching television too loud. Down the hall, a man called for his daughter who never answered. I tried to remember what it felt like to be useful. Life at Sunset Manor fell into a routine that felt more like slow dissolution than living. Breakfast at 8, medication at 9, activities at 10, lunch at noon. A carefully structured march toward nothing. Jessica visited twice a week, breezing in with updates about the house sale, always speaking in bright, patient tones used with the very old. The house closed yesterday, she announced during her third visit. I've set up an account for your expenses and the rest is invested safely. You don't need to worry about any of it. Can I see the paperwork? Jessica laughed. Dad, you signed power of attorney. I handle all the financial stuff now. That's the point. But it's still my money. Of course it's your money. I'm just managing it for you. Her smile never wavered. Trust me, everything is being handled properly. Something in her tone made me uncomfortable. The way she said your money sounded like someone humoring a child. I started paying attention to other residents. Mrs. Chen, supposedly unable to live alone, spoke 4 languages and had been a chemistry professor. Mr. Rodriguez, here because of confusion, was reading engineering journals. None of them seemed incompetent. They seemed like people who'd been told they were incompetent until they believed it. Just like me. I started thinking about the incidents Jessica mentioned, getting lost driving to the grocery store. But that was during construction when they'd changed all the street signs. Forgetting to pay the electric bill once during Margaret's final illness. I requested to see my financial paperwork. The request was denied. Your daughter handles all that. I asked to call my old accountant. I was told all calls were monitored for resident safety. I asked about visiting my old neighborhood. Transportation would need Jessica's approval, and unsupervised outings weren't permitted. This was prison. A comfortable, clean prison, but prison nonetheless. If I was truly as incompetent as Jessica claimed, how had I managed to analyze my situation and question my circumstances? Maybe I wasn't as useless as everyone, including me, had assumed. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 months after I'd moved to Sunset Manor. "Mr. Patterson, this is Martha Williams from Williams & Associates. I'm calling about your wife's will." "Margaret's will? Jessica handled all that?" "There's been a request for a formal reading. All beneficiaries need to be present. Could you attend Friday at 2? I'll need to ask my daughter about transportation. I've already spoken with Jessica. She's arranged for car service." Friday afternoon, a black sedan picked me up. The 20-minute ride downtown showed me my old world, the one I'd been removed from for my own good. Williams & Associates occupied 2 floors of a building I remembered from my business days. Martha Williams was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Patterson. Please, have a seat." Jessica was already there, looking impatient. Across from her sat 2 people I didn't recognize, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit and a woman with a briefcase. "Dad, I don't know why we have to go through this formal thing," Jessica said. "It's just a waste of time." Martha Williams opened a thick folder. "Actually, Jessica, there are aspects of your mother's will that haven't been discussed, provisions that only take effect under specific circumstances." "What kind of provisions?" Jessica's voice sharpened. Martha pulled out a document. "Margaret Patterson's will, dated 18 months ago, includes codicils added during her final illness." 18 months ago, right when Margaret was getting her diagnosis. "The primary will leaves everything to Robert Patterson, as expected. However, there are additional instructions regarding what should happen if Robert Patterson is declared incompetent or placed in supervised care against his will." The room went quiet. "I don't understand," Jessica said, but her face had gone pale. "In the event that Robert Patterson is manipulated into supervised care, or if his competency is questioned without proper medical evaluation, the estate shall be distributed as follows: 50% to the Alzheimer's Association, 25% to the Legal Aid Society's Elder Abuse Prevention Program, 25% to establish a fund for elderly people who have been improperly institutionalized." Jessica shot to her feet. "That's impossible. Mom wouldn't have done that." She also left a letter explaining her reasoning. "Would you like me to read it?" I felt like the room was spinning. Margaret had known. She'd foreseen exactly what would happen. "Please read the letter," I said quietly. Martha Williams unfolded Margaret's personal stationery. "If you're reading this, my husband has been placed in supervised care, probably by Jessica. I love my daughter, but I know her weaknesses. She sees her father as helpless and inconvenient. She's wrong. Robert built a successful business from nothing. He raised 2 children, managed complex investments, maintained our household for 50 years. The only thing he can't do is live without me, not because he's incompetent, but because I never let him. I'm writing this because when I'm gone, Jessica will convince Robert he's useless. She'll use his grief against him. She'll take his independence and call it care. I won't let her steal his life for money. If Robert is reading this, you are not helpless, you are not incompetent, you are grieving. And grief makes everything harder, but it doesn't make you incapable. Jessica has been managing you because I let her. I thought it would make things easier. I was wrong. Fight for yourself, Robert. Fight for your right to make mistakes, to be confused sometimes, to live imperfectly but freely. Fight for your right to be human instead of managed. If you don't fight, if you accept being warehoused, then Jessica gets nothing. Not because I don't love her, but because I won't reward her for treating you like a problem instead of a person. The choice is yours. Stay in supervised care, and the money goes to charity. Reclaim your independence, and it comes to you. Choose freely. Choose as the man I married, not the invalid Jessica convinced you that you are." The room was silent except for Jessica crying. "This is cruel," she whispered. "Mom is punishing me for trying to take care of Dad." "No," I said, my voice stronger than it had been in months. "She's punishing you for convincing me I couldn't take care of myself." I looked at my daughter. "How much of my money have you already spent, Jessica?" "What?" "The house sold for $480. My investments were worth about $300,000. That's almost $800,000. How much is left?" The man in the expensive suit spoke for the first time. I'm Detective Morrison with the Financial Crimes Unit. We've been investigating elder financial abuse. Jessica went still. According to bank records, approximately $600,000 has been transferred from Robert Patterson's accounts to accounts controlled by Jessica Patterson over 3 months. That money was for his care. Sunset Manor costs $3,800 a month, Detective Morrison continued. 3 months would be $11,400. Where did the other $590,000 go? The silence became an answer. I want to go home, I said. Dad, you don't have a home anymore, Jessica said desperately. I sold it. Then I'll get an apartment. I'll figure it out. What I won't do is stay in that place while you steal my savings and convince me it's for my own good. Martha Williams smiled. Mr. Patterson, I think your wife would be very proud. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new apartment, a nice 2-bedroom near my old neighborhood, reading the newspaper and drinking coffee I'd made myself. Jessica had been arrested for elder financial abuse. Most of my money had been recovered, though she'd managed to spend about $50,000 on lifestyle expenses. She was facing 2 years in prison. More importantly, she'd been forced to confront what she'd really been doing, not caring for me, but warehousing me, not protecting my interests, but pursuing her own. The hardest part hadn't been reclaiming my money or independence. It had been realizing how easily I'd given both up, how readily I'd believed that being sad and confused made me incompetent. Margaret had been right. I had been over-dependent on her, not because I couldn't function alone, but because she'd made it easier not to. Learning to cook for myself, manage my schedule, handle problems, it was harder than expected, but not impossible. Just different. I'd hired a weekly cleaning lady. I'd joined a senior center. I'd even started dating a widow named Patricia, who thought my story about fighting back was inspiring. Most people just accept what their children tell them, she'd said over dinner. They assume their kids know best. Sometimes they do, I'd replied, but sometimes they just know what's most convenient. The assisted living facility had been perfectly nice, but none of that mattered if you weren't choosing to be there. Choice was what made the difference between living and existing. Jessica had written me from prison, a long apology trying to explain how she'd convinced herself that controlling my life was caring for me, how she'd started by genuinely worrying and ended by seeing my grief as opportunity. I'd written back, a short note saying I hoped she'd learn the difference between love and management, between helping someone and helping yourself to someone's life. Margaret had saved me twice, first by loving me for 53 years, then by refusing to let that love be used as a weapon against my freedom. Every morning when I woke up in my own bed, making my own decisions, I thought about her letter, about her insistence that I was worth fighting for, even when I'd stopped fighting for myself, the phrase that stayed with me. Fight for your right to be human instead of manage. Jessica had called me useless in front of everyone at Margaret's funeral. Margaret had used her will to call me priceless. I knew which voice I was going to listen to.